Hi everyone, I am Josh. Welcome back to Josh's Bookish Voyage. Today I'm going to do Friday Reads. Basically, I like to do Friday Reads whenever I have a miscellaneous video I need to do and I have to call it something. So this Friday Reads, I'm going to talk about what I've been reading and what I'm hoping to read this weekend. But I'm also going to talk about some books that I've hauled, as well as the second part of my October wrap-up, because I realized after recording it and posting it, like weeks later, that I had left off like 4 different books. I guess let's start there. See, the first thing I don't think I mentioned was Cardiff by the Sea. This was a collection of 4 novellas by Joyce Carol Oates. This was something I listened to for a e-arc that I had to review for like over a year ago. I think it came out 2020. And I was hesitant just because I've only read a few Joyce Carol Oates stories, and they've been short stories, and she tends to lean literary. Sometimes literary isn't always the easiest and most, I guess, fun to read. And I will say I'm kind of waiting because these stories actually worked really well for me. They were very gothic, which fit into Gothtober. They were very just dark and foreboding, and they tend to have very similar themes, what have to do with patriarchy. I think sex, it's been a while since I've read it, honestly. And a family, a orphanage, things like that. Like, it was actually pretty dark. It felt like it blended very well with Shirley Jackson and say, oh, what we do in the castle, things like that. These stories about these people who live very dark lives. It worked really well. I think I talk about this in my ranking all the horror books that I read in the last year. So check that out for more in-depth analysis, just because I'm more detached and I don't remember all my thoughts. I just remember really liking this, and I think I gave it 4 stars, maybe 4 to 4.5. Plus the narrator was actually solid. It was really solid. A good book, but also a great surprise. Next is Along the Saltwide Sea by A. Deborah Baker, aka Sean McGuire, book 2 of the Up and Under series, which is a spinoff from Middle Game. I listened to this when it came out. I don't own it yet, but this is one of the few books that I wanted to actively just instantly read, or listen to rather, before I even buy the book. And that's because I invested in the story so much. I invested in Sean McGuire and the Middle Game franchise so much. This is book 2 of that series where we're following the same kids. It's basically middle grade, maybe YA, depending on how you look at it. Overall, I think I gave this 3.5 to 4 stars. I did like it. Like, I don't regret reading it. It was what I wanted, which was more in this world. But what it also felt like was exactly what I think it was intended to be, which is to say a continuation for the sake of continuing, which I don't begrudge Sean McGuire that. I love her writing, I love her stories, and I'm so glad to get more of this world. But it was clear to me that I think she had a better idea of the first book than she does of this one or the entire series. Like, I'm sure she has an idea of what she's going to do. But we have this first book, which felt like a series of events happening in one story for one overarching narrative. While this story, I felt like our characters haven't changed much. They're pretty much the same, which, to be fair, they went through a lot of character growth in the first book. But more than that, like, the central conflict felt like the equivalent of one of the conflicts in the first book. The first book had so many obstacles to get through, and this one, we focused on one. It might have been a little bit longer than the other ones, but overall, the book was much shorter, and it definitely felt like, instead of giving us a full novella, it felt like she just decided to tell one of the stories, one of the obstacles, and it just didn't fit in the context of the first book. Like, sure, it fit tonally and in the setting, but as far as the structure of the first book, it just felt like we did sort of 360. Like, she wanted to reshape what these novellas are going to be. Like, this idea of having 4 books, I believe she sets up Middle Game roughly that you have this story of these 2 kids, right? And to work as an allegory to the main conflict of Middle Game. I don't know if she ever just says clearly in the series how long the series was to be, just that there were a series of books by this person who was a master of alchemy. What's wrong with me? Because she clearly only had sort of thought through the first one, I think we're starting to see that she's still trying to find her footing. I don't doubt Sean McGuire can make this work. I mean, it still works, just not as effectively as the first one. But I'm excited to see where she takes it in the future, and I'm hoping we'll get a bit more. I'm hoping that this is just sort of her way of tying the stories together. We'll see not just a more expanded story, but hopefully just something different. Like, I'm not the kind of person who hates repetitiveness. If I like something, I want more of it. But for it to be a truly good book, it does need to have some originality there. And the second one definitely was not original in the context of the first book. It just wasn't. It was the same thing, just continued. And while there's value in that, I think there's potential for better. Next up is When Things Get Dark, which is a book that I mentioned or sort of hinted at in my September wrap-up. And this is one that I started reading in September and had just barely finished at the beginning of October. I had just a little bit left in October. And this is an anthology of short stories edited by Ellen Datlow with the theme being Shirley Jackson. All these stories were meant to evolve around Shirley Jackson. I believe I gave this 5 stars. I think my average was like 4.5, but I'm honestly just going to round it up to 5 stars because I think there's something to be said, not just about the quality of the stories themselves, but the variety and the choices made by the editor. Like, there is some inherent value there that I think should be considered when rating something like this. I think it's fair to say this is a full 5 stars. It starts really strongly because it gets into the best parts of Shirley Jackson, my favorite parts of Shirley Jackson, that is, and then we start to get into more of her more domestic life at times in ways that I don't think worked quite as well for me. But what I do think the book did, or the anthology did, thoroughly throughout, was be quintessentially Shirley Jackson. Even no matter if I loved the story or not, it was still quintessential Jackson. And that, the book did exactly what it was trying to do. And overall, I loved it. Phenomenal anthology in its own right, but especially if you're a fan of Shirley Jackson, definitely worth checking out Ellen Datlow's newest anthology. I think we have one more now, 11/22/63, one that I read 5 or 6 times now. And I had this physical copy, I just didn't pull it out. It's just one of those audiobooks I listen, like with it, one of those audiobooks I just listen to in the background. I think I started this book, I started rereading it back in 2019. So it gives you an idea, I've been listening to it that slowly over the last like 2 or 3 years. And honestly, now that I've finished it, 11/22/63 ended, chances are I'm going to pretty soon start picking it back up again, especially 11/22/63. It's just that story that I absolutely adore. And as much as I know it so well, it's sometimes, if I'm not in the mood to actually read, like start a new book or do anything like that, but I wanted to consume something, 11/22/63 is always going to be there. I love this story. It's overbloated, but it's everything that I want it to be. The narrator is perfection. Okay, now let's go ahead and do the few books that I'm hauling. Okay, so I will remind you, or tell you if you don't know, that I have a book buying ban. It has been pretty successful before this last month, but while there are some books that I hauled while I was in DC, which you will see in that DC vlog, overall, I've managed to avoid buying new books that I haven't already read. And so the books I'm hauling now are books that I've ordered since my last trip home back in July. And so basically these are books that I've read or listened to, most of which are ARCs, because those are most of the books that I'll read if I don't already own, with a rare exception being books like Across the Saltwood IC, books that are not just new and excited for, but I'm so excited I can't help but just push everything else aside and read it, which is actually quite rare, I'm not gonna lie. Up first is Sarah Pinsker's We Are Satellites. This I've already talked about. This is going to be a review. I talk about this in what? Oh, in my October wrap-up. No, my September wrap-up. I like this. I think it's solid 4 stars. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be sort of a space planet type story, and it was more of a near future technological dystopia, and it was interesting and thought-provoking. Okay, Surrender Your Sons, one that I think I meant to do a review about a while back. I think I may have talked about this in a queer lit reading vlog that did not go up, and then it did go up like a year later with the one with, I believe I was reading not Soraland, An Unkindness of Ghost by River Solomon. And I talk about there, this was a YA thriller about a gay kid who gets sent off to conversion camp by his mom. And at the core, it was fine, it was engaging, I read through it super fast. But I don't know, I haven't read any books about conversion camps, and maybe I'm not valuing this for its audience because I'm not its intended audience. But at the same time, when I think to myself, what is possible, the type of story that can be told about conversion camps or things similar with similar themes, I can't help but imagine there must be better books out there. Not that this handles it poorly, it's just the storytelling is just so mediocre, and I feel like the analysis is just it's low-hanging fruit. Not that this isn't worth talking about, but just the level of conversation that's being had in here is just so superficial. I guess it's meant to be for gay kids to help them cope, help them understand that they're being seen, and they're not the ones who've gone through this, but at the same time, I have to imagine there are better stories out there. I'm curious if you've read any stories that have to do with a kid being put through conversion camp, whether it's adult or YA. Okay, next is a story I don't think I've talked about much. I don't know, I must have reviewed it at some point back earlier this year. It came from the MULTIPLEX, 80s Midnight Chillers. This was, I think, a 3 or 3.5 star collection. I got this because of the title and because of the way it looked. Now, what I will say is there might have been one or two stories in here that were actually good. One of those being a story by Stephen Graham Jones. The other one I don't quite remember because all the other names are very quite small, and I think the quality of the stories reflects that. I know that seems kind of mean, but it's the truth. I read it. It wasn't a cheap book to buy, but I do love the cover. If I read it, kind of what I wanted, but that is a cool cover. Next up on my books that I have read. Okay, we have here a Bradbury collection from Library of America, and this is novels and story cycles. And this one I bought because I think it's fairly new collection. I've read just about everyone in here. The Martian Chronicles, one of my favorite stories and collections of the year. Fahrenheit 451, one of the first stories I remember reading in high school that I absolutely adored. And Something Wicked This Way Comes, something I read back in 2019. Dandelion Wine is one that I have not read. If it's a collection, that's something I've read, and I consider that not a new on my TBR. But plus, it's kind of a special exception here because I think my intention with my Library of America collection is not the same as my regular TBR. I don't know what the fuck I'm getting at here. I like these fancy books. That's the core of what I'm trying to say. I like fancy books. I like the fanciness of it, and that's why I want more of them. Next up, we have something I think my mom thought I got for her, so she put it away. And she thought that because it has the word God in it, but all God's children need traveling shoes. This is Lynn Thigpen's narration of Maya Angelou's, I want to say, fourth memoir, and I'm so excited that I finally got my hands on this because I also have a tape MP3 player, so I can basically convert this to audio and have it wherever I want. I'm so psyched. Lynn Thigpen narrates Parable of the Sower. She is spectacular narrator. She passed away, I think, back in the early 2000s, which is very sad, so I'm glad to have her to add to my collection. And this was one actually I think I bought, I want to say before when I came to visit in April, like so earlier in the pandemic. And then lastly is one I didn't buy, and there's a new book to my TBR, but I did not buy it. It was gifted to me, and that is The Guest List, which is one that I had mild interest in. And then my stepmother said she read it, and she gave it to me. And I say mild because it's a thriller, and I seem to be struggling to get excited about most thrillers. This is one that I do think I'm more than just intrigued about. I guess I'm intrigued for sure. I have so many thrillers I need to read. Now let's get on to what I'm reading. I finished Being Mortal today. It's behind a stack of books. I don't want to hold it up. I'm getting tired. Being Mortal was a memoir, but also reflection on Atul Gawande's life as a surgeon and doctor, and dealing largely with death, with mortality, and how we approach that. His biggest, I think, central idea in this book is dignity as we approach death. Basically, we should have the right to choose what we value. Healthcare, in the system of healthcare, seems to value life at whatever the cost, when the fact is life is always inevitably going to end, and towards the end people should have a right in deciding, do they value quality over quantity, especially when quantity, the attempts to get quantity, are so often frivolous and more harmful towards even that goal than let alone their own mental health. And it basically consists of his slow progression to reaching that point, while also incorporating some stories about how healthcare around getting old has evolved through time, while also just telling his own personal story as a doctor and around his father and losing his father. And while the stories individually are very sad, I found myself on the verge of crying all the time because of the fact that it just forces you to reflect on your own life and the people that are close to you. And so it's a phenomenal book, 5 stars without a doubt. I think it was helped also by the fact that the narrator was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I think he was akin to Steven Weber from It. If you ever listened to It, Steven Weber is a fantastic narrator, and this guy had the same, I think, same type of voice, same tone of voice, and I very much appreciate that. Now, I'm also technically reading the Janus Point, but I've been reading this since the beginning of the month, since before the month started actually, and I'm maybe halfway through it. I'm not feeling it. It's esoteric, poorly written. I don't like it. I don't think it's meant for mainstream audiences. I'm not DNFing it, but I'm at the point where I'm very behind in my reading because I was traveling, and I have other things that I value more. If I find myself in the mood to read it, or like in a between part towards the end of maybe towards the end of the month, I'll find that I don't have time to read the book. Maybe I'll try to finish this one off. But for now, it's just on the back burner. The other books that I'm reading right now actually would be instead Raising Them by, I think, Kyle something. And it's a book by a non-binary author talking about their experience in raising their child without any gender norms. I don't want to, I guess, as non-binary, but technically the child hasn't identified what their gender is, and that's the point. It's about raising the child without describing them with any particular gender, without giving them preconceived notions of what their gender should be, and until they reach the point where they can choose for themselves, where they can say with their own internal certainty that this is my gender, or who they is for the moment, this is what their gender is. And until then, they just are who they are. And so far, it's interesting. The writing is fine, nothing is spectacular, but it's a fascinating story so far, and I think the premise sort of just gives you the main idea. There's a level of just like, oh, that makes sense, I think, implied in basic concept, and I wonder if there's more we can discuss before it all is said and done. Now, beyond that, I may end up not starting anything else this weekend before I finish that, but if I do, I'll probably jump on to Hattie McDaniel, Black Ambition in White Hollywood, because I'm going to be doing a ready read of this with Bree from Lock Petition. I had mentioned to her possibly getting the author, but I have yet to contact her, so I doubt that's going to happen. But we're going to be talking about this book together. I'm like 90% sure it's going to happen, because just the communication's been kind of slow, because we've both been very busy. But reading this, I think November 27th is the tentative plan. That we're going to be talking about this live, I believe, on my channel. And then I'm not sure when we're going to be doing this, but I'll also be talking about Mom and Me and Mom by Maya Angelou, the 7th memoir in her collection. And I believe we'll be talking about this on Bree's channel, The Lock Petition. I'm not sure when, and that's why it's sort of secondary to this book. And I believe I should have time to read both, but I have a lot of other books I want to read too. But for now, those are the books that I'm reading right now and in the near future. Thank you so much if you stuck around through this entire miscellaneous type of video, Friday reads. I know it's not technically a Friday reads if I'm not just talking about what I'm reading, but I had a lot of things to catch up on, so I thought this would be a good place to do it. I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. I am back home, not on my trip anymore, and hopefully I'll get my Washington reading vlog, or Washington vlog with a little bit of reading, up to y'all before the end of the month. But it's long, so don't get your hopes up. I'm also very busy. I'm trying my best. This is technically the first video that I think I'll be posting on my new Pixel 6 Pro that I got while I was in America. I am so excited because while the colors are not quite right, I think it does sort of make me look more tan. The book seemed a little overly super saturated. The quality, I believe, is a step up. So I hope you can tell, and I hope it looks good. Part of the reason I got this phone was for just a better video for y'all. But that is everything I have to talk about. If you made it to the end, why don't you give me a stack of books? Keep it traditional, and as always, stay safe, and I will see you all next time, okay? Goodbye.